Welcome, and thank you for your interest in this subject. My name is David E. Hopper, and this is an introductory talk and podcast on what I'm calling the evolutionary service groups of civilization. I'll be talking about them shortly and with descriptions. A brief background of who I am. I've been working with and teaching with what is known as the ageless wisdom for over 45 years. For me personally, this has been a remarkable journey, and I'm excited to be happy to impart what I've learned all these years into an engaging and relatable way. The information I'll be talking about is of a spiritual nature and not religious. For me, when I started out in the early 1980s on my spiritual path of discovery, I had no idea who I was, why I'm here, my purpose, and certainly no idea I could possibly come to like who I am. I was also basically without any particular faith. Quite honestly, I was quite miserable and did not like who I was. What changed me? A kernel of awakening began when I read spiritual texts such as the works by Alice Bailey and Theosophy, and listened to speakers on spiritual and esoteric subjects. This caused an awakening within me. I was inspired to read and eventually connect with groups and organizations and spiritually inspired subjects who shared a similar interest. This led me to study and follow mostly Eastern spiritual teachings such as Hindu, Buddhist, and Theosophy. And together, these teachings helped to transform me literally from the inside out through different methods such as learning the importance of meditation and defining a spiritual practice and learning that I am a soul. This knowledge has brought me to understand how to live with a life of spirit and purpose that knows the importance of love and understanding and of who I am. Prior to listening to these podcasts on the evolutionary service groups of civilization, I highly recommend that to grasp a deeper understanding of the spiritual concepts discussed in these podcasts on the service groups, that you also listen to my podcasts on the way to soul consciousness. There I describe subjects about what makes us up as human beings, including themes on spiritual evolution, consciousness, and the nature of the soul, and about the practice of spiritual values, such as cooperation, goodwill, in all of life's activities. This podcast series on evolutionary service groups of civilization is based on my book, The Subjective Influences Through the 10 Seed Service Groups. These podcasts and books are also available on my website, sacredteachings.us. It's all together as one word, sacredteachings.us. The podcast is also available on Spotify and Apple. Before getting into the details of each of the 10 evolutionary groups, I want to provide some background and context for beginning this discussion. One of the main purposes of these podcasts is to bring you into a deeper awareness of the subjective and higher influences that work through the already existing service groups of civilization. Yes, it is about the big picture of the various energies and forces influencing humanity. When humanity consciously invokes the energies of light, means wisdom and intelligence, love, compassion, understanding, and tolerance, and the use of the will, all facets of life on Earth will be affected. The result will be an awareness to build a civilization built on right human relations, basically recognizing all people and living beings as souls. So in short, there is an underlying and background intelligence guiding what we are calling the spiritual hierarchy. I'll get into what that is in a little bit. So humanity is going through a great change. It is a time when the global brain of humanity has awakened, when individuals and groups are waking up to the realization that we are the first generation to be conscious of our own consciousness. This podcast series is designed to show that there are and has been a progressive development of civilization towards expanding man's awareness. With this knowledge, you will come to understand that our world is being and has been transformed from the inner planes. That is, we have the outer planes called the physical world, but the inner planes in your consciousness, through your desires and free will and outward manifestations, all the different things that we create in life, the physical objects, the thought forms we attach to them, and the feelings we attach to them. We create all these different groups and, political, scientific, spiritual group, religious groups, all these different types of groups contribute to what we call civilization today. As to what we have created, take a neutral or dispassionate look at the history books and today's news. From the esoteric teachings, largely from theosophical sources, if we look back approximately 600 years ago, we will understand that humanity has been undergoing a great transition which will eventually herald a new and evolutionary shift in human consciousness. It marks a move toward a greater group awareness also based on the Aquarian principle of sharing and established harmony and unity throughout the world. Astrologically, we are moving out of the age of Pisces and into Aquarius. Pisces has been a time for the last 2,000 years, a time of the individual at the personal, group, and national level. The era of Pisces has been highlighted by conflict, competition, and a me-only consciousness. In contrast, the Aquarian ideal is about individuals and groups demonstrating how to work together in cooperation and towards establishing harmony, peace, and unity in all human activities. During this time of transition, those who are participating in world transformation include the service workers of all nations and cultures, whether they're conscious of it or not. They must rely on their ability to invoke higher thoughts, ideas, and impressions by turning them into creative solutions that aids in the redemption and upliftment of humanity. They acknowledge the existence of the me versus them separative mindset that has persisted over the centuries. Interestingly, though, with the outpouring of light, love, and the will to good, an expression from basically from theosophical teachings, through numerous service activities, a near constant friction in the political, social, cultural, and economic sectors is created. Friction here is represented in the form of the service workers representing the higher values of cooperation and goodwill that run counter to those who are separative and narrow in thinking and action. This friction has manifested in how people perceive their world, how they relate to others, and the environment. These are all subjective energies. That is, how you feel and how you perceive things. It all takes place in the mind. But in the last several generations, the service workers are rapidly moving humanity from a me-only mentality towards a we-group community understanding. They have implemented this concept by invoking and evoking new ideas that are helping to guide humanity in seeing the limitations of selfishness, greed, bigotry, materialism, and all of its manifestations, so they can create a new spiritually oriented civilization based on what we are calling right human relations. They typically embrace the concepts of goodwill, cooperation, understanding, tolerance, inclusiveness, and we will work it out together attitude. Let me talk a little bit about what we're calling subjective influences. A major premise of these podcasts is that there is a spiritual pretext behind the foundation of civilization. It's the idea that each of the 8 billion souls currently in incarnation each have a spiritual life known consciously or unconsciously. It's a life and consciousness that provides insight, meaning, and purpose for life just below the surface of awareness. So we're talking about our feelings and our thoughts, which are influenced subjectively by other people, from groups, and from places beyond humanity's usual purview. From birth, most people relate to the world through 3 distinct modes of experience: the physical, emotional, and the mental. We are conditioned to hold that only 5 measurable senses are valid and all other states of consciousness, such as the daydream state, the abstract mind, and the dream states, are unreal. However, in actuality, those other states are the origin of true inspiration and creativity and are subjective in nature. The irony here is that most basic activities of what we are calling human, such as thinking and feeling, a person's experience of life and other people, any experiences of pain, pleasure, desire, love, hate, or who you think you are, is felt and known in the subjective realm of consciousness. Therefore, as a beginning premise of this podcast, it is our challenge to recognize and acknowledge our true nature, that we are subjective beings having a human experience in an objective world. In esotericism, we understand the individual's personality and conceptual mind is made up of energy, that is, thoughts and feelings, and these are used for interacting with the objective world. The higher faculty of the abstract mind is where the personality makes the first contact with the soul, that spiritual part of ourself, and the intuition. It is also a place that allows us to have the capacity for intuitive spiritual understanding, pure love, and pure reason. The idea that using our imagination and the abstract mind has been with us for generations. But how do we use it? And what are the positive expressions of it in the world? We are told in so many places in society that to solve a problem, we must think outside the box. This invites us to use our abstract mind and to invoke the intuition to receive a creative solution for the problem at hand. Although this outside-the-box orientation is happening for many individuals and professions, it must be recognized at the most basic level of human development, such as in early education of the impressionable child, and ultimately incorporated into all facets of life and professions. On another level of subjective experience, each person's life has meaning. When interpreting an event or situation, the individual has life experience. Certainly, it varies from person to person as his personal orientation in how he thinks, feels, and what values he most has. These are mostly what's at stake. Of course, we can have a dialogue about whether one is conscious of these dynamics or not, besides a discussion about our subjective and abstract natures and where the real you exists. Perhaps the core of this discussion is about existentialism. According to one definition from Google, existentialism is a philosophy that emphasizes individual existence, freedom, and choice. It is the view that humans define their own meaning in life and try to make rational decisions despite an existing irrational universe. This definition cuts to the purpose of these podcasts. We acknowledge that there is over 8 billion humans in incarnation who are constantly defining and expressing meaning in their lives in every waking moment, whether the outcome is good, bad, or indifferent, or consciously or unconsciously. Meaning in this context is another very subjective concept that all of us have in the back of our minds. You might ask the question, what is my purpose, activity, or why am I doing this? Every day, you and others are making myriad of decisions through an act of will. Your intention or desire is for X to happen, so you put out the energy to make it so. Whenever you express an idea, a thought, or feeling, these all emanate from a subjective space in consciousness. Now that you realize you're functioning in a subjective level of consciousness, or what might be called the inner landscape, the question again is for you to ponder, what am I doing with this information? To illustrate this point, when a person sends prayers or healing energy to somebody at a distance, this action has an effect to heal. But how? The person is not physically present. You're not interacting with them in your presence, but at a distance. There is a great deal of research to support the concept that when an individual or group holds their prayers or thoughts, these thoughts have a measurable effect and result. The scientists David Bohm, Rupert Sheldrake, and Dr. Dean Radin, to name a few, have all proven in the realm of quantum field that non-local events can be influential through healing and prayer. When applying the same non-local field concept of prayer, situations and events can be influenced, such as in the social, political realms, by focusing the higher thoughts of cooperation, compassion, and goodwill to affect outcomes. Of course, there's people working in the objective world too, the physical objective world, that are physically on the ground making things happen too. They are also motivated from the spiritual realms, although they may or may not be conscious of it. An understanding of our subjective nature and the use of the abstract mind is particularly relevant to the activities of many of the evolutionary service groups of civilization that we'll be discussing in these podcasts. At different times in these podcasts, I'm going to be connecting with or talking about what's known as the spiritual hierarchy. And we want to know what is their work and who are they. Continuing on the theme of subjectivity, the spiritual hierarchy is a group of advanced souls such as the Buddha and the Christ. And the spiritual hierarchy also includes many numerous other members such as sages, mystics, and saints of all cultures from all the major religions and beliefs over the ages. A major achievement for them was to expand their consciousness into greater inclusivity and a mastery over their physical, emotional, and mental natures. These great souls, known as masters, and the spiritual hierarchy have transcended all temptations and limitations on the physical objective world. As custodians of God's plan, or the plan, they help humanity respond to the will and purpose of God. What is the plan, and what is this purpose? In today's parlance, it's like a mission statement for a company to operate. In esotericism, the teachings from the theosophical sources, mainly, present an understanding that divine inspiration comes from solar and cosmic sources. In its most basic form, the plan represents three major divine aspects working out in humanity, namely will, the expression of love, compassion, and wisdom, and intelligence. It is from the spiritual hierarchy that the plan as a type of blueprint or energy formula is conveyed to individuals and groups via impression. Impression comes as a type of knowledge and inspiration that is expressed through light intelligence, through love or compassion, and using the energy of will or consciously carrying out service-related activity. People are doing this work and implementing the will to good. Again, whether they're conscious of it or not. An impression, the concept of it, think of an impression as simply says, you're getting an impression maybe from my voice. What does it feel like to you? You're seeing somebody speak at a lecture perhaps on television or in person, and you're getting a sense of their body language. You are getting an impression of them. The spiritual hierarchy holds the plan as a type of blueprint for planetary evolution, by conveying to its spiritual seekers via impressions. Impressions are, just as it sounds, ideas and insights that come to mind. They convey to men and women of goodwill through numerous professions and NGOs that they should practice higher values such as goodwill, cooperation, and harmlessness through thought and action, although they are never imposed. When an individual or group responds to the impression from spiritual guides on the inner planes or the hierarchy or both, it helps to impose changes in their own being, their life, and it helps to transform their nature. And this, of course, is all based on their own personal willingness. For the individual, this can result in personal transformation. With members of the spiritual hierarchy communicating ideas and impressions to sensitive or receptive individuals, their ideas and impressions amount to the idea of revelation. The sensitive man, in turns, helps to direct these energies to the inner and the outer planes through telepathy and direct communication by contacting people connected with the world service groups who are enacting change in the world. So, in essence, what happens is an individual gets an idea. A person who is motivated by service, he or she gets an idea in his or her consciousness. They individually take action in the world and perform service. They connect with a group to take service, and they take this idea, which was inspired from the inner planes, and they help make transformation take place in their own nature and in the outer planes. So to this end, a major purpose of the spiritual hierarchy is to communicate with anyone who has a spark of light in their heart and their mind, or through impression or telepathy using their conscious, unconscious, or abstract mind. So the hierarchy can communicate through many different parts of our consciousness in our minds. Other means of contact with humans can take place either directly or indirectly through higher evolved souls known as initiates or guides. These people are not initiates or guides are not necessarily, they are not masters yet, but they can still be highly spiritually evolved, such as somebody that you recognize could have. The Dalai Lama is a form of a spiritual initiate and certainly a guide for many, many people. Each member of the spiritual hierarchy has the following responsibilities: to train individuals on the path of service, such as through impression, and carry out the plan, the divine plan or God's plan, within his or her capacity and where his or her skills best fit, and to inspire and train humanity to move onward with the path of evolution. This is in contrast to the path of involution, people who want to maintain the material, physical world the way it is, which has been shown for hundreds, if not thousands of years to be ultimately destructive to humanity's nature as a soul. This activity can involve working directly with individuals who are readying themselves for higher expansions of consciousness. These people that are expanding their consciousness are most likely on the path of evolution and are wanting to help and progress humanity forward to becoming more of a soul nature. Here, the master would include the individual in his group who would be expected to participate in activities for serving the plan. So the individual would be inspired by impression, telepathy, some type of contact, whatever activities they're participating in on the outer planes. Also, the hierarchy's responsibilities includes acting as a transformative agency using their will and love, will in a will to good, in a will to wisdom concept, and compassion by stepping down potent energies and transmit them to humanity and the lower kingdoms. So they're transmitting energies of the plan to people who are spiritually sensitive to these energies, and they're translating them in many, many, many different forms throughout all of the evolutionary groups of humanity. They realize that we individually and at the group level must come to understand that we are consciously part of evolution. This will ensure a world governed by cooperation, not by an imposed authority or a utopian dream. I've spoken about the hierarchy and the service workers, so let's talk about the service workers a little bit more. Who are they and what do they do? Major function of the service workers is to act as a bridge between the humanity, the spiritual hierarchy, and the hierarchy is also working with a inner structure on their plane of consciousness called the ashrams. And there's 7 major ashrams, and there's a master for each ashram, and each ashram has responsibility and purpose for making the plan work out on the planet. The ashrams located on the higher planes, like I said, they hold the plan for higher evolution of humanity in their heart and mind, and they communicate to those minds, people are sensitive, to the thoughts and ideas and impressions from the masters and turn them into creative solutions that aid in the redemption and upliftment of humanity. Redemption is raising up the matter. If we think of our emotions, we think of our thoughts, and these have qualities, and there's an actual energy and matter in our being that is transformed and uplifted when we connect to the soul's nature and higher. The service workers are also called the hands and the feet of the spiritual hierarchy, and they spiritualize and carry out the thought life for each of the evolutionary service groups, and they act as a synthesizing factor, pulling things together, connecting of other groups and people for establishing right human relations, particularly in the everyday man's consciousness. So the average person on the street, you might say. In essence, they are the doers for implementing the higher way of the plan. It should be noted that each individual server and members of the myriad of groups serving in the outer world are also evolving and purifying their own lower nature of impurities. Many of them are conscious of this dynamic, and many of them are not, but they're still doing it nevertheless. From this, we see the goal of human evolution in what is called the spiritual path. It's ultimately infusing an upgrade, to use parlance of today's wording, of the higher energies from a higher spiritual plane of which our soul is connected to. As an impulse of evolution, the evolutionary service groups were first defined in the 1930s by the Tibetan spiritual master known as Dwal Kul as a long-term experiment by the spiritual hierarchy. They are also known as seed groups in another vocabulary, in that the kernel or the seed of the ashram's purpose or the hierarchy's purpose of the plan, that is, of the groups, the spiritual groups, which I'll get into in a few moments, the education, the politics, the science, religion, etc., all have a higher expression of the group, and it's being fulfilled. So there is a spiritual concept behind education, politics, science, religion, the media, for example, and the financial services group, the creative workers in the world who connect with all the groups. These are just some of them, which I'll talk about shortly. This endeavor is intended to implement a long-range plan by the spiritual hierarchy for creating 10 external evolutionary service groups. And each of these groups would become magnetic and a focal point of energy with the intent of creating the same energy on the physical plane. So these 10 evolutionary groups of civilization already exist on the higher planes. So there are masters that relate to politics, that relate to education, to science, religion, etc. They relate to the higher aspects of these working out. And so it is the hierarchy's intent and purpose and that of the plan for these 10 external groups to the external groups which already exist, but the groups need to be spiritualized and uplifted so that they could become magnetic focal points of energy. The service workers are subjectively and objectively transforming civilization already with the objective of impressing the plan on leaders of the evolutionary service groups around the world. The subjective and objective purpose of these evolutionary service groups, their work, ideally will bring a cohesion and rhythmic activity with the unfoldment of each group. That is, the unfoldment and rhythmic activity that I'm referring to is a transformation of society by their influence. Eventually, their work will establish each group as powerful focal points for the revitalization of humanity and the planet. Spiritual hierarchy established each of the groups as magnetic focal points of energy with the intent of creating the same energy, as we talked about. It should be pointed out that the primary world service groups already existing on the physical plane, but have to fully implement the ashramic purpose in their intention. And I mentioned before that the service groups are already active in the social, political, cultural, healing, educational, scientific, and economic fields. This will bring about a cohesion and revitalization of civilization that will eventually establish each group as a powerful focal point for the planet. So we'll conclude this introductory podcast by briefly describing what each of the evolutionary service groups will do, or actually doing, and what they will do, and their current activities, and how they will impact humanity and what they are intended to become in the Aquarian age. Keep in mind that each group has at its base a kernel of spiritual potential, and the name of each seed group is based on the descriptions from the Alice Bailey teachings. The first of the 10 groups is known as the telepathic communicators. Working with the higher mind of the soul, they send and receive ideas and impressions from the master and the soul to create the direction of thoughts, or to change the direction of thoughts, from the everyday man to enable a new way of communication in society. As custodians of group progress, they conceptualize and communicate the concept of unity and cooperation. The second group, the trained observers, their primary objective is to dispel deception and untruths on the emotional plane. The observer employs right observation of events and situation and reports truth. Now again, remember, we're talking about the ideals of what these groups are intended to be and become. By making ideas more easily understood, this stimulates creative work and allows people to obtain the essence of truth and see a wider view of the problem. By reporting largely through the broadcast media, they become capable of critical thinking and the apprehension of true knowledge instead of wild conspiracy theories, unhinged truths, and these also apply or work with the first seed group, the telepathic communicators, which are basically like think tanks. The third group is known as the magnetic healers. Healing is transmitted. This type of healing that is described here is being transmitted directly from the soul. That is, the healer is directly connected with his or her soul, and they are transmitting this living force of the soul through them directly into the patient to heal. This heals the personality and dissipates disease. A healing of the personality helps bring forth the concept of right human relations, cooperation, and eliminating a competitive or me-only response. So there's a sense of unity which is imparted. The next group is called educators in the New Age. Educators teach about how to prepare for developing higher values and character building, such as teaching goodwill and cooperation, teaching education for peace, and to bridge the gap between the lesser mind and the soul. The next group is known as the political organizers. Workers in this group will facilitate right political and social order within civilization through the expression of will. They will help mankind to realize it's collectively part of one humanity, irrespective of nation or race. They represent right management of ideas and have the power of impact through their will, and often result in breaking up and destruction of old forms that hinder. So a politician says something that can be very powerful. Maybe some people agree with it, they disagree with it, but what he or she says can have physical impact on the physical plane and cause things to be broken down and transformed and become something else. And so their idea ultimately is to make room for the new emerging idea. Politicians and administration, the politicians in those government management, they manage various physical plane crises. Obviously, they help with legislation, the way we have our government set up around the world in different forms. Ideally, their activity is the form of truth through knowledge. So they have the responsibility of communicating truth to the average people in their nation. This is bringing conscious awareness towards others and their activities. A leader with a greater vision is teaching responsibility and helps to negate separative attitudes with regards to race and protests, for example, we have in society. So they're helping to bring people together, to unify people and not separate or divide, ideally. Another group is the workers in the field of religion. Religion in the Aquarian age will center around man's desire to understand the divine life by subjectively approaching and seeking unity or at-one-ment with it. There's much more to be said on that, so stay tuned to that podcast for much greater detail on this. Another group is the scientific observers. They apply a mental understanding to the laws of nature, and they will, through their work, study the energy that motivates and penetrates the outer forms and the spiritual essence that creates new forms as an expression of inflowing spiritual life. So, in other words, they study the essence of an object, for example, a living being, for example. They discover a new fish at the deep sea, and they observe this energy, they observe this life, and they observe and understand what species it is, what genus or phylum it is. For the astronomer, he or she will be able to look at the distant stars and galaxies and be able to use some type of scientific analysis for understanding it based on the laws of physics and science that they know. There's also an underlying implication here for the scientific servers that there's a spiritual understanding of cosmic laws and that there is a greater consciousness which is making these laws work out, and that we are discovering this. And so they will identify these. The next group is known as the psychologists. Psychologists in the Aquarian age will work with the revelation of the soul. leading to the revelation of divinity and humanity. So they will help with expressing the soul, understanding the soul, the principles of how the soul works in our world and expresses through our world. The next group is the financiers and the economists. Financiers and economists, or the financial services group, will work with the Aquarian principle of sharing and that right allocation of monies and resources at the soul level. So the soul does not hoard or act greedily, and the concept of the soul shared with people and nations and groups. It helps people. It is not hoarded and kept from other people. So it's the principle of sharing which is involved here. This is a major function of what they will do. They will also help with the right allocation of resources to bring balance to the economies around the world, the principle of sharing again, and also create alliances for people to work together. And they will also work at the political level too, or with politicians to make this happen. The last group is known as the creative workers. They link and blend life and form creatively by synthesizing words, color, objects, and music from many diverse sources to create manifestations of beauty, such as what we see in the entertainment, the arts, and all forms of creative expression. We see the creative workers working everywhere, and they can be working in all groups. For example, they can be the creative workers can be creating manifestations of beauty in architecture, for example, or artwork, or when you go to a concert and you enjoy that concert, or people who are making music that is fabulous, like a Mozart or a Beethoven. These people have created or are creating great forms of beauty which are soul inspired. Okay, this concludes this podcast, and for each of these evolutionary service groups, there will be a separate detailed description of what each one is doing now and their potential into the future. Thank you for listening.